to vintage horror, where the darkness comes alive. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? What time is it in your world right now? And most importantly, how does this tale make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and brace yourself for a chilling journey into the unknown. The road to Hollow Bend was a serpent of asphalt coiling through the redwoods, its curves sharp enough to make my knuckles ache on the steering wheel of my '98 Honda Civic, a rusting relic I'd bought for $500 after the fire took everything else. The late September sun hung low, a dull orange disk bleeding through the canopy of branches overhead, casting jagged shadows that danced across the dashboard. The clock blinking 4:17 p.m. A lie. It had been stuck on since Boise. The gas gauge twitched near empty, its needle a nervous flutter, and the radio hissed static, a white noise that filled the silence where my thoughts churned. Portland's ashes, Jamie's absence, a life I'd torched without meaning to. My name's Lena Carver, 31, a woman who'd spent 10 years shelving books in a cramped Portland shop, dog-eared paperbacks, first editions I'd sneak home, a quiet life I'd built around words until a spark in the walls turned it to smoke. The fire was 3 months ago. Faulty wiring, the landlord said, shrugging as I sifted through the rubble, finding nothing but a melted laptop and the frame of a photo I couldn't salvage. Jamie and me at the coast, his grin wide, mine shy, a memory of before he shipped out and didn't come back. The insurance gave me a pittance, $2,000, barely enough for this car and a tank of gas. So when I saw the ad online, caretaker needed, Hollow Bend, room and board, $300 a month, I didn't hesitate. It was a lifeline, a chance to escape the pity in my co-workers' eyes, the landlord's excuses, the weight of a city that no longer fit. The woods thickened as I drove, the redwoods towering like giants, their bark rough and red, their needles carpeting the road in a rust-colored shroud that crunched under my tires. The air through the cracked windows smelled of damp earth and pine sap, a sharpness that stung my nose, a contrast to Portland's rain-soaked concrete and exhaust. My phone had lost signal an hour back, its screen a blank slate, no bars, no maps, just me and this road, a ribbon of gray winding north into Idaho, a place I'd never been, a town I'd never heard of until that ad. The sign came at last, Hollow Bend, 5 miles. Its letters faded, its edges chewed by rust, a promise I clung to as the gas light blinked on, the engine coughing its warning. Hollow Bend spilled into view as the trees parted, a ragged cluster of houses and trailers strung along a single dirt road, their clapboard siding weathered to shades of gray and brown, their roofs sagging under moss and time. The valley cradled it, redwoods hemming the edges, their shadows long and dark, swallowing the last of the daylight. A general store sat at the road's mouth, Hollow Goods, its sign peeling, its windows smudged with years of neglect. And I pulled into the gravel lot, the Civic shuddering to a stop, its exhaust a faint wheeze as I cut the engine. The air was cooler here, heavier, a dampness that settled on my skin as I grabbed my duffel from the passenger seat, canvas fraying at the straps, stuffed with jeans, a few shirts, a water bottle, Jamie's photo, wrapped in a sock to keep it safe. The store's bell jangled as I pushed through the door, a shrill clang that echoed in the stillness, the floor creaking under my scuffed boots, the shelves a maze of dusty cans, beans, soup, peaches, stacked beside faded magazines, their covers curling headlines from a decade ago. A woman stood behind the counter, mid-50s, her gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it stretched her scalp, her eyes sharp and flinty, glinting under the fluorescent hum. She wore a plaid shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a name tag, pinned crooked, Doris, her pen scratching a ledger, pausing as she looked up, her gaze pinning me like a moth to a board. You the new girl? Her voice was rough, a smoker's rasp that scraped the air, her lips pursing as she set the pen down, its tip stained black. Yeah, I said, shifting the duffel, its weight digging into my shoulder, my throat dry from hours of silence. Lena Carver, here for the caretaker job? Mrs. Hargrove's place? Doris nodded, her eyes flicking over me. Boots, jeans, the jacket I'd worn since Portland, its hem frayed, sizing me up with a grunt. She's up the hill, last house on the left. Old Bat's been waiting. Legs gave out last spring, needs someone to cook. Clean, keep her alive. You got grit, you'll manage. She slid a key across the counter, brass, its edges worn smooth, its weight cold in my palm. Gates unlocked. Watch the woods. Gets dark fast and they don't like strangers poking around. I took the key, her warning a prickle on my neck, a thread of unease I brushed off as small-town quirks. Thanks, I muttered, pocketing it, the bell jangling again as I stepped back into the dusk, the gravel crunching underfoot, the air biting my cheeks as I climbed into the Civic. The engine sputtered to life, protesting as I coaxed it up the hill, the road narrowing to a rutted path, the trees pressing closer, their branches scraping the roof like fingers testing the metal. Mrs. Hargrove's house loomed at the crest, a 2-story husk of peeling green paint, its eaves sagging like tired shoulders, its windows cloudy with age, its porch a graveyard of flower pots, geraniums withered to brown husks in cracked clay. I parked, the engine coughing its last, a plume of exhaust curling into the air as I stepped out, the gravel shifting under my boots, the silence thick save for the wind whispering through the redwoods. The porch steps groaned as I climbed, each one a protest, the wood soft with rot, the railing wobbling under my hand. I raised a fist to knock, the door's paint flaking under my knuckles, but it swung open before I could, a creak that split the quiet, revealing a woman in a wheelchair, white hair wild like a storm cloud, skin crumpled like old paper, eyes a piercing blue that cut through me, pinning me where I stood. Lena, I presume? Her voice was a rasp, sharp despite the frailty of her frame, her hands gripping the chair's arms, knuckles white, her oxygen tank hissing faintly beside her, tubes snaking to her nose. You're late. Roads were rough, I said, stepping inside, the air thick with dust and a faint sweetness. Rot, maybe, or something older. My boots scuffing the hardwood, the duffel heavy on my shoulder. Sorry. She waved a bony hand, dismissing it, her nails yellowed, her fingers trembling slightly. Rooms upstairs, second door on the right. Kitchen stocked. Make supper by 6. I don't eat late, and I don't abide dawdling. She wheeled away, the chair's squeak a grating echo down the hall, her shadow stretching long and thin across the faded wallpaper, floral, peeling in strips, a ghost of someone else's care. I stood there, the door clicking shut behind me, the house settling with a groan, its walls a cage I'd stepped into willingly. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step a complaint, the banister sticky with grime, the air growing colder as I climbed. The hall upstairs was narrow, its carpet threadbare, its walls lined with photos, black and white faces, stiff poses, eyes staring through time, strangers I didn't know. My room was the second door, its knob loose, its hinges whining as I pushed it open. A small square of space, a single bed with a patched quilt faded to gray, a dresser missing a knob, its wood scarred with scratches, a window overlooking the town below, its glass streaked with rain marks, its frame rattling in the wind. The redwoods loomed outside, their tops swaying, their shadows, a dark tide washing over Hollow Bend's lights, winking on one by one as dusk bled into night. I dropped the duffel on the bed, the mattress sagging under its weight, a puff of dust rising as I unzipped it, my hands moving slow, deliberate, jeans folded, shirts stacked, the water bottle dented but full, Jamie's photo unwrapped from its sock, its edges curled, its glass cracked but holding. I set it on the dresser, his grin a beacon in the gloom. 17, hair tousled, standing on that Oregon beach, me beside him, 13, squinting against the sun, a day before he enlisted, before the letters stopped, before the silence that never explained. I traced his face with a finger, the glass cool, a knot in my throat. I swallowed down, the room's stillness pressing against me. Downstairs, the kitchen was a cramped cave, chipped linoleum curling at the edges, a stove with rust spots and a hiss when I lit it, a sink stained brown, a fridge humming faintly, its handle sticky with years of grease. I rummaged the pantry, cans of soup, a sack of potatoes sprouting eyes, onions soft with age, a stick of butter wrapped in wax paper, and started supper, the knife dull but steady as I chopped, the onion sting watering my eyes, the potato's skin peeling away in curls, the sizzle of butter, a small comfort in the quiet. Mrs. Hargrove wheeled in at 6 sharp, her chair squeaking to a stop at the dining table. A slab of oak scarred with knife marks, its chairs mismatched, one wobbling on uneven legs. I served the stew, potatoes and onions, in a thin broth, salt and pepper from rusted shakers, its steam rising in wisps, its smell, earthy, filling the room. She ate in silence, her spoon scraping the bowl, her movements slow, deliberate, her gaze drifting to the window, where the woods loomed black, their edges lost in the dark. I stood by the counter, a mug of tea cooling in my hands, chamomile from a tin I'd found, its bitterness grounding me as she finished, the bowl clattering to the table. "Folks here are good," she said at last, her voice a rasp that cut the stillness, her eyes flicking to me, blue but shadowed. "Keep to themselves, mostly. You'll meet 'em soon enough. Don't pester 'em, and they won't pester you." She wheeled away, the hiss of her tank trailing her, leaving me to clear the dishes, the stew's remnants congealing, the sink's drip a steady beat as I scrubbed, the water cold against my knuckles, the house creaking around me like it was listening. That night, I lay in bed, the quilt rough against my skin, the mattress lumpy, its springs digging into my back. The wind rattled the window, a low moan through the redwoods, and I stared at the ceiling, its plaster cracked in spiderweb lines, my mind replaying the drive, Doris's warning, Mrs. Hargrove's stare. A sound drifted up, a hum, faint and rhythmic, like wind through reeds, but too steady, too alive, seeping through the cracked window, threading into the room. I sat up, the quilt slipping, my breath shallow as I crossed to the glass, peering out. The town was dark, its lights dim pinpricks, the woods a wall of shadow, the hum rising, falling, a pulse I couldn't place. I pressed my forehead to the glass, its chill seeping into me, the hum growing, 3 notes, then 5, a melody that wasn't wind, wasn't but human, wasn't anything I knew. It faded, slow, leaving silence, and I crawled back to bed. The quilt a shield I pulled tight, my heart a thud in the dark, telling myself it was nothing. Just the woods, the night, a new place playing tricks. But sleep didn't come easy. The hum, a whisper in my dreams, gold eyes tapping fingers, a song I couldn't shake. The next morning, I woke to gray light filtering through the window, the air cold, the quilt tangled around my legs. Mrs. Hargrove was up, her chair squeaking in the hall, her voice calling, "Breakfast, girl, don't dawdle." And I stumbled downstairs, the stairs groaning, the kitchen still shadowed, the stew's smell lingering. I cooked oatmeal from a tin, lumpy but warm, a splash of water from the tap, its taste metallic, and served it, her spoon scraping again, her silence a wall, as I sipped tea, the chamomile bitter on my tongue. The neighbors came that day, a parade of faces that broke the quiet, their knocks a rhythm on the door, sharp, insistent, a small-town welcome I hadn't expected. Doris had spread the word, and they arrived with gifts, piling onto the porch, their voices a buzz that filled the house. Mrs. Tillman was first, a widow with a tremulous smile, her hands shaking as she handed me a pie. Blueberry, its crust golden, its juice seeping through, its weight warm in my hands. "Fresh this morning," she said, her voice a quaver, her gray curls pinned under a scarf, her eyes brown but watery, crinkling as she smiled. "Good to have new blood here." "Thanks," I said, setting it on the railing, the sweetness cloying. My smile tight as she shuffled off, her slippers dragging, her shadow small against the gravel. Cal came next, a burly man with a beard like a briar patch, his flannel stained with sawdust, his pickup parked at the trailer next door, its bed piled with firewood. "Cut this yesterday," he said, dropping a bundle at my feet, the logs thudding, their bark rough, their smell sharp with sap. "Winter's coming. Keep you warm." His hazel eyes crinkled, his grin easy, and I nodded, the woods weight a promise I stacked by the steps. The Perry twins, Ella and June, rolled up together, sisters in their 30s, their trailer down the road, a splash of pink against the gray. Ella's curls bounced as she handed me a knitted scarf, wool, blue, its stitches tight, her laugh bright, her words quick. "Keeps the chill off. Trust me." June smiled, quieter, her hand steady as she adjusted her own scarf, their matching blonde hair a mirror, their chatter a burst of light in the gloom. "We're glad you're here," June said, her voice soft, her eyes warm, and I thanked them. The scarf soft against my fingers, their laughter trailing as they left. Tara and her son Ben were last, their trailer at the road's edge, half hidden by overgrown bushes, their knock soft, hesitant. Tara was mid-30s, her brown hair in a messy bun, her eyes tired but kind, a plate of cornbread in her hands, golden, crumbling, its warmth seeping through the foil. "Welcome," she murmured, her voice a whisper, her gaze flicking to the woods, then back. Ben clung to her leg, 8 maybe, silent, his dark eyes fixed on me, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his stillness a weight I couldn't read. "Hope you settle in," Tara added, turning away, Ben's stare lingering as they retreated. The cornbread a gift I set beside the pie, its smell rich, grounding. I brewed coffee, grounds from a dented can, water from the tap, the pot hissing on the stove, and poured it into chipped mugs, the neighbors gathering on the porch, their voices overlapping, a hum of life that eased the knot in my chest. Cal sipped, his mug steaming, his tales of fishing the ridge a low rumble. "Caught a trout once, big as my arm, swear it." Ella laughed, her scarf bright, Her stories of deer in the woods quick and sharp, June nodding beside her, their rhythm a dance I watched, the coffee bitter but warm in my hands. "You'll like it here," Cal said, draining his mug, his grin crinkling his eyes, his beard catching the light. "Quiet mostly. Woods keep the world out. City folk don't bother us." "Long as you don't mind the dark," Ella added, her twin echoing her nod, their curls bobbing, their smiles easy. "Gets thick at night? Sticks to you?" I smiled, pouring more coffee, the mugs clinking, their kindness a thread I clung to, a balm after months of ash and loss. Mrs. Tillman stayed after the others left, her pie plate clutched to her chest, her scarf slipping, her hands trembling more now. "Watch the woods," she whispered, her voice a shiver, her eyes darting to the trees, then back. "They listen. Always have." She shuffled off, her slippers dragging, her warning a splinter in my mind, echoing Doris's, a puzzle I couldn't fit. Days stretched into weeks, a rhythm settling in, cooking for Mrs. Hargrove, oatmeal mornings, stew nights, the knife dull but steady, the stove hissing its protest, scrubbing floors, the linoleum cold under my knees, the mop's handle splintered, coaxing her through stretches, her legs frail, her grunts sharp as I lifted, her oxygen tank hissing like a metronome. The neighbors wove through it, Cal dropping firewood, the logs thudding, his grin a constant, the twins inviting me for tea, their trailer bright, their cups chipped, their laughter a burst. Tara leaving cornbread, her knock soft, Ben's silence a shadow at her side. I'd walk the dirt road at dusk, the air crisp with pine, my boots kicking gravel, the town's lights a constellation against the dark, the redwoods a wall that held it all in. The hum came some nights, louder now, a chant-like drone rising from the woods, threading through the trees, vibrating in the air. I'd pause mid-step, listening, 3 notes, then 5, then a dozen voices weaving together, a song I couldn't place, couldn't ignore. I'd tell myself it was wind, animals, my imagination spinning tales, but it stuck, a burr in my mind, a sound that didn't belong. Mrs. Hargrove heard it too, once, her chair squeaking as she wheeled to the window, her eyes narrowing, her voice a mutter. "They're restless tonight." I asked, "What? Who?" But she waved me off, her hand trembling, her gaze fixed on the dark, her silence a wall I couldn't climb. I locked the doors that night, front, back, the windows too, the bolts cold, the latches stiff, checking them twice, 3 times, the hum, a whisper outside, a thread I couldn't cut. The first real sign came late October, a Thursday, when the sky clotted with gray clouds, the air heavy with coming rain, the wind a low moan through the redwoods. I was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Mrs. Hargrove's faded dresses, my jeans, the scarf from the twins, its wool soft against my neck, the clothespins slipping from my cold fingers, the fabric flapping like ghosts in the breeze. The woods loomed close, their shadows long, their needles rustling, and I glanced up, mid-pin, my breath catching as I saw Cal across the yard, standing by his trailer, his broad shoulders rigid, his beard matted with dirt. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, staring at the woods, his stillness a statue's pose, his hands hanging limp, twitching faintly. I dropped a pin, its clatter lost in the wind, and called, "Hey, Cal, you okay?" My voice trembled, the air suddenly cold, the dresses swaying as I stepped closer, gravel crunching under my boots. He didn't turn, didn't blink, his silence a weight, and I stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see, his eyes, catching the dim light, glowing a dull gold, like Coins in a well, their gleam sharp, unnatural, pinning me where I stood. Cal, I whispered, my hands clenching, the wind tugging the laundry, the hum starting low, a drone from the woods that matched his stillness. He turned then, slow, deliberate, his head tilting at an angle too sharp, his face blank, his lips parting in a smile that stretched too wide, showing teeth too sharp, too many, glinting in the gray light. "Lena," he said, his voice flat, a note off-key, a buzz that wasn't his. "It's good here, real good." He stepped forward, his boots dragging, his hands rising, ridges pulsing under his skin like veins too close, too alive, and I stumbled back, the clothespins scattering, the dresses flapping wild. I ran, the house a blur, the back door slamming behind me, my hands fumbling the lock, the bolt scraping into place as I leaned against it, panting, the hum, louder now, a chorus threading through the woods, vibrating in the walls. Mrs. Hargrove wheeled into the kitchen, her tank hissing, her eyes narrowing as she saw me, wild-haired, pale, trembling. "What's got you, girl?" she rasped, her voice sharp, her gaze flicking to the window where Cal's shadow loomed, then faded, his hum trailing him back to his trailer. "Cal, he's not right," I stammered, the words spilling, his eyes, his voice, the hum that followed. She listened, her face a mask, then muttered, "Woods, get in folks sometimes, change 'em." Seen it before. She wheeled away, her chair squeaking, her words a shard of ice in my gut, a hint she wouldn't explain. I stood there, the kitchen dim, the stew pot cold, the hum, a pulse outside, a new hollow bend wasn't what it seemed, and I'd stepped into its song. The morning after Cal's golden stare pinned me in the yard. Hollow Bend woke under a sky heavy with gray, the clouds sagging low over the redwoods, their edges blurring into mist that clung to the valley like a shroud. I stood at the kitchen sink, the water cold against my knuckles, as I scrubbed Mrs. Hargrove's oatmeal bowl, its crust stubborn, the spoon clinking against the porcelain, my hands trembling despite the steam rising from the tap. The hum had haunted my sleep, a low drone weaving through dreams of gold eyes and tapping fingers, Cal's voice buzzing, "It's good here," until I jolted awake. The quilt tangled, my breath a fog in the chill of the room. I'd lain there, listening, but the night had gone silent, the hum fading with the stars, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I glanced out the window, its glass streaked with grime, the yard a patchwork of gravel and weeds, the laundry line sagging where I'd left the clothespins scattered, Mrs. Hargrove's dresses flapping in the breeze, their faded colors muted under the overcast sky. Cal's trailer sat across the lot, its door shut, its windows dark. No sign of him, no thud of firewood, no shadow moving, but the memory of his eyes burned, gold and gleaming, a shard I couldn't dislodge. I dried my hands on a towel, its threads rough, its edges frayed, and told myself it was nothing. Lack of sleep, a trick of the light, my mind spinning tales from the hum, but the unease stuck, a burr under my skin. Mrs. Hargrove wheeled into the kitchen, her chair squeaking over the linoleum, her oxygen tank hissing faintly, its tube snaking to her nose, her white hair wilder today, strands escaping the bun she'd pinned. "You're jumpy," she rasped, her blue eyes narrowing as she parked by the table, her hands gripping the arms, knuckles white against her papery skin. "What's eating you, girl?" "Cal," I said, the words slipping out, my voice low, the mug of chamomile tea cooling in my hands, its bitterness sharp on my tongue. "Yesterday he looked wrong. His eyes, his voice." I faltered, the image too vivid, his smile too wide, the hum too alive. She stared, her face unreadable, then grunted, her gaze flicking to the window, where the woods loomed, their redwoods a wall of shadow against the mist. "Folks change out here," she muttered, her voice a scrape, her fingers tapping the chair, a rhythm that echoed the hum in my memory. "Woods get in 'em. Seen it before, long time back. Don't fuss over it." She wheeled away, the hiss of her tank trailing her. Her dismissal a brick wall I couldn't climb. Her words a splinter that dug deeper. Seen it before. A hint of something old, something she wouldn't share. I finished the dishes, the sponge sodden, the sink's drip a steady beat, and stepped onto the porch, the air damp, the gravel crunching under my boots as I scanned the town. Hollow Bend moved on, or seemed to, smoke curling from chimneys, a pickup rumbling down the road, its tailgate rattling, the faint clatter of a can rolling in the wind. But it felt off, a photograph warped at the edges, its normalcy a mask I couldn't trust. I grabbed the broom from the corner, its handles splintered, its bristles worn, and swept the porch, the dust swirling, the geranium pots rattling as I worked. The motion, a tether to keep my hand steady, my mind from wandering. Mrs. Tillman appeared then, her shuffle, a slow drag across the gravel, her scarf slipping, her gray curls pinned tight, a pie plate in her trembling hands. Apple this time, its crust golden, cinnamon wafting through the air, a sweetness that turned my stomach. "Thought you'd like this," she said, her voice a quaver, her smile small, her hand shaking as she set it on the railing beside the blueberry one, its juice congealed now. Flies buzzing over it. I thanked her, my voice tight, the pie's warmth seeping through the foil, but her eyes caught the light. Gold flecks glinting where brown should have been, her pupils shrinking, her gaze drifting to the woods, then back. "You settling in okay?" I asked, stepping closer, the broom still in my hand, its bristles scraping the wood, my pulse quickening as she hummed. A soft, tuneless sound, 3 notes, repeating, the same hum from the night, from California. "Mrs. Tillman?" I pressed, my voice sharper, the air colder, the mist thickening around us. She smiled wider, her lips twitching, her teeth glinting faintly, and hummed louder, the sound buzzing in my ears, a drone that matched the wood's whisper. "Good to have you here, Lena," she said, the words slow, mechanical, her head tilting slightly, her scarf slipping further, revealing a ridge under her neck, faint, dark, pulsing, like a vein too close to the surface. She turned, her slippers dragging, her hum trailing her, as she shuffled back to her house, its door creaking shut, the pie untouched, its scent cloying, a gift I couldn't stomach. I dumped it in the trash beside the last one, the foil crumpling, the apples spilling, the flies scattering, my hands shaking as I scrubbed them raw, the soap's sting a distraction from the hum that lingered, a thread in the air. The Perry twins were next, their knock sharp on the door that afternoon, their voices a bright chirp as I let them in. Ella with her quick laugh, June with her steady hands, their blonde curls bouncing, their scarves bright against the gray day. "Tea time," Ella said, her grin wide, her arms full of a thermos and cups, the scent of chamomile wafting as she set them on the kitchen table, its oak scarred, its surface sticky with years of spills. June smiled, quieter, pouring the tea, the liquid steaming, its warmth a balm as I sat, the mug hot against my palms, their chatter a burst of light in the gloom. "Seen any deer yet?" Ella asked, her words quick, her hands gesturing, the tea sloshing in her cup. Big one crossed the road last week. Antlers like branches. Swear it. June nodded, her curls mirroring Ella's, her voice soft. They're restless this time of year. I sipped, the tea bitter but grounding. Their company a shield against the morning's unease. The hum, a faint echo I pushed down. We talked. Small things, town gossip, the twins' flea market finds. Their laughter a rhythm I leaned into, the kitchen brightening with their presence, the stove's hiss a counterpoint as I reheated stew for Mrs. Hargrove. Halfway through, Ella stopped, mid-sentence, and then Cal said, her cup clattering to the table, tea spilling in a dark arc across the wood, her hands freezing, her head tilting to match June's, who'd dropped the thermos, its lid rolling, its clang swallowed by silence. Lena, Ella said, her voice flat, her eyes gleaming, gold, bright, unblinking, staring at me. June's matching hers, their mouths parting to hum, that same three-note drone, buzzing in unison, a sound that crawled under my skin. What's wrong? I stammered, my mug slipping, shattering on the floor, the shards scattering, the tea pooling as I stood, the chair scraping back, my pulse a frantic thud. They rose, moving as, one step, toward me, their smiles stretching, teeth too sharp, too many, glinting in the dim light, their scarves slipping, revealing ridges on their necks, pulsing, dark, alive. The hum spiked, a chorus now, vibrating in the walls, the air, my chest, and I backed away, the counter digging into my spine, my hands grasping for the knife. The dull one from supper, its blade cold in my grip. Stay back, I whispered, the words a croak. The twins advancing, their steps synchronized, their eyes locked on mine, their hum, a pull I felt in my bones. Lena, it's good here. I bolted, the door banging shut behind me, my boots pounding the gravel, their hum chasing me down the road, a buzzing swarm that threaded through the mist, vibrating in the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the house, slamming the front door, the bolt scraping into place, my breath ragged, my hands shaking as I leaned against it, the wood cool against my back. Mrs. Hargrove wheeled into the hall, her tank hissing, her eyes sharp. What's got you running, girl? And I spilled it, the twins, their eyes, their hum, my voice cracking, the knife still in my hand, its blade trembling. Woods are restless, she muttered, her gaze flicking to the window, her fingers tapping, her voice a rasp that chilled me. They'll settle. Always do. She wheeled away, her dismissal a wall, her cryptic words, always do. A shard I couldn't grasp. The hum, a faint drone outside, a promise of more to come. The change spread through the hollow bend like a stain, slow but relentless, a rot I couldn't unsee. Cal stopped chopping wood, just stood by his trailer day after day, staring at the woods, his hands twitching, ridges rising under his skin, dark and pulsing, his gold eyes glinting whenever I passed, his hum a low growl that followed me. Tara's son, Ben, vanished from the yard, his tricycle abandoned in the grass, rusting under dew, his silhouette a ghost in their window, his small hands pressed to the glass, gold eyes glowing through the dusk, unblinking, watching. Tara came by one evening, her bun unraveling, her eyes tired but gleaming, a casserole dish in her arms, macaroni and cheese, its top crusted brown, its warmth seeping through the foil, its smell sharp with cheddar and something sour. Thought you'd like this, she said, her voice a monotone, her smile tight, her hands trembling as she handed it over, the dish heavy in my grip. I took it, the ceramic warm, and asked, Ben okay? Haven't seen him play. She froze, her head tilting, her hum starting. Soft, buzzing, the same 3 notes. And her eyes flared, gold, bright, piercing. A tendril curling from her wrist, faint, black, slick against her skin. "He's good," she said, too quick, too flat, turning away, her steps stiff, her hum trailing her into the dark. The casserole a weight I dumped in the trash, its cheese rancid, its stench mingling with that earthy copper smell. My hands scrubbing raw after the soap's sting, a futile cleanse. I started locking everything, front door, back door, windows, the bolts cold under my fingers, the latches stiff, checking them twice, 3 times, 4. The hum growing nightly, no longer faint, a chorus now, rising from the woods, threading through the town, vibrating in the walls, the floor, my skull. I'd lie awake, the quilt pulled to my chin, counting the notes, 3, 5, a dozen voices weaving together, a song that wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything I could name. Mrs. Hargrove slept through it, her snores a counterpoint, but her mutterings grew. The choir's calling. Roots are deep, whispers in her sleep that chilled me, her voice a rasp that carried through the house, a warning I couldn't decipher. I couldn't sit still, couldn't wait for it to find me. One afternoon, with Mrs. Hargrove napping, her chair parked by the window, her tank hissing, I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its beam weak, its batteries rattling, and slipped out the back door, the air damp, the gravel crunching under my boots, the woods a wall of shadow I stepped into. The redwoods closed around me, their bark slick with moss, their branches clawing my jacket, their needles carpeting the ground, in a rust-colored shroud that muffled my steps. The air was thick, pine, earth, that sour copper stench, a weight that pressed against my chest, my breath shallow as I followed a faint trail, overgrown, barely there, my boots sinking into mud, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The hum guided me, a pulse in the air, low but steady, drawing me deeper, the trees parting after an hour, maybe 2, the mist thinning, the ground leveling into a clearing, a circle of stones, each fist-sized, gray and smooth, ringing a pit in the earth, its edges jagged, its depths lost in shadow, its surface pulsing faintly, a heartbeat I felt through my soles. I stepped closer, the flashlight's beam cutting the gloom, its light catching black ooze, seeping from the pit's rim, glistening, slick, alive, pooling in rivulets that shimmered like oil, dripping onto the stones, their surfaces scarred with claw marks, smeared with that ooze, a stench rising that burned my nose, rot, copper, something older, deeper. The ground shuddered, a low thrum rising from below, the hum spiking, a chorus now buzzing in my ears, vibrating in my teeth, and I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping, its beam spinning wild, catching roots curling from the pit, faint, black, twitching like fingers seeking light. "What the hell?" I whispered, my voice a croak, the air buzzing, the hum, a song I knew, Cal's growl, Mrs. Tillman's whine, the twins' chime, threading through the trees, alive in the earth. I turned, the woods a blur, and ran, branches snapping against my arms, thorns tearing my jeans, my breath a sob, as I crashed through the undergrowth, the hum chasing me, louder, closer, a drone that pulsed in my skull. I tripped, sprawling into mud, the flashlight rolling, its beam dying in the wet, my hands clawing dirt as I scrambled up, the trail lost, the redwoods a maze I staggered through. The hum grew, a dozen voices, then more, calling, "Lena!" A whisper on the wind, a pull I felt in my bones, urging me back. I reached the yard, the house looming, its green paint a beacon, and burst through the back door, slamming it shut. The bolt scraping into place, my hands shaking, mud streaking the floor as I leaned against it, panting, the hum, a roar outside, vibrating in the walls, a song I couldn't escape. Mrs. Hargrove was awake, her chair in the hall, her tank hissing, her eyes sharp, blue still, thank God, as she stared, her voice a rasp. "Where'd you go, girl?" I spilled it. The clearing, the pit, the ooze, the hum. My words tumbling, my hands gesturing, the knife from my pocket now, its blade dull but steady. "Something's wrong," I said, my voice cracking. The hum, a pulse beyond the door. She grunted, her gaze flicking to the window, her fingers tapping. "Woods are alive out there, always have been. Don't go poking again." She wheeled away, her dismissal a wall, her cryptic shard. "Always have been. A weight I couldn't lift." The hum, a promise of more to come. The hum became my shadow, a constant drone that seeped into everything, nights, days, the air itself, a song I couldn't outrun. I stopped leaving the house, unless I had to. Groceries from Doris at the store. Her eyes glinting gold now, her hum, a buzz, as she handed me cans, her fingers ridged with faint veins, firewood from Cal's pile, his silence a threat, his hands more root than flesh, his gold eyes tracking me as I hurried back. Mrs. Hargrove grew quieter, her stew untouched, her gaze fixed on the woods. Her mutterings, "They're calling Lena." A knife in my gut, her voice a rasp that carried through the house, her blue eyes flickering sometimes. A hint of gold I prayed I imagined. The night it broke open, October's end, the moon a sliver drowned in clouds, the air thick with mist. I woke to the hum at its loudest, a roar that shook the windows, rattled the dishes, buzzed in my teeth, a chorus that pulled me from sleep, my quilt slipping, my breath a gasp in the dark. I sat up, the mattress creaking, the room cold, the hum a pulse that vibrated in the walls, the floor, my skull, dozens of voices, hundreds maybe, weaving together, calling something I couldn't name. I slipped on my boots, the laces tangled, my fingers fumbling in the dark, and grabbed the flashlight, its batteries fresh now, its beam a lifeline, as I crept downstairs, the stairs groaning, Mrs. Hargrove snores, a faint hum of their own, her door ajar, her mutterings, the choir sings, a whisper that chilled me. She stirred as I passed, her voice a rasp. "Don't go, girl." Her hand reaching from the dark, her fingers trembling, but I couldn't stay, couldn't sit and wait for it to claim me. I slipped out the back door, the gravel crunching, the mist cold against my face. The woods, a wall of shadow, I plunged into, the flashlight cutting the gloom, its beam trembling as I followed the trail, the hum a beacon, a pulse guiding me deeper. The redwoods closed around me, their bark slick, their branches clawing, the air thick with that sour copper stench, my boots sinking into mud, my breath shallow, my pulse a frantic thud as I pushed on. The clearing a memory I chased, a truth I had to see, the trees parted, the mist thinning, the ground leveling into the clearing, the stones ringing the pit, the ooze glistening, the hum, a roar that shook the earth, a chorus alive in the air. I hid behind a redwood, its bark rough against my cheek, the flashlight off, my breath a whisper as I peered out. They were there, all of them, ringed around the pit, a fire blazing in its center, flames licking the night, casting gold across their faces, their bodies swaying, their hum, a song that pulsed in my chest. Cal stood tallest, his beard matted with ooze, his arms outstretched, tendrils curling from his fingers, black and slick, reaching toward the fire, his gold eyes glowing, his hum, a growl, that anchored the chorus. Mrs. Tillman swayed beside him, her scarf gone, her hair wild, her hands clutching twigs that writhed, snapping as she moved, her eyes amber, bright, her hum a high whine that pierced the dark. The Perry twins flanked her, their curls matted with dirt, their skin mottled with the veins pulsing dark, their mouths open, chanting, words sharp, guttural, a tongue of earth and decay, their gold eyes locked on the pit, their steps synchronized, their hum a chime that threaded through the roar. Tara and Ben stood rigid, her bun unraveled, tendrils sprouting from her neck, black and curling, her eyes gold, her hum a drone. Ben beside her, his small form stiff, his eyes twin embers, his hands dripping ooze onto the stones, his silence a hum of its own. Doris was there, her ledger gone, her glasses glinting, her fingers clawing the air, ridges rising under her nails, her hum a rasp that joined the chorus. Others, faces from the store, the road, swelled their ranks. A dozen, then more, their bodies swaying, their eyes glowing, their skin breaking with roots, their hum a swarm that buzzed in my skull. The fire flared, a burst of gold, and I saw it, a mass in the pit, lowered on ropes of woven vines, a writhing thing of flesh and roots, its surface slick, its red eyes blinking open, glaring through the flames, its pulse matching the hum, the ground trembling as they chanted louder, their voices a roar. Grow, rise, sing. A song that shook the trees, the stones, the air itself. The mass twisted, its roots reaching up, curling toward them, and they reached back. Cal's tendrils entwining, Mrs. Tillman's twigs merging, the twins' veins stretching, Tara's roots threading, a union of flesh and earth, a choir of the changed. I pressed against the tree, my heart a frantic drum, my hands slick with sweat, the flashlight slipping, its metal cold against my palm. The hum spiked, a scream in my skull, and I felt it, a pull, a whisper in my mind. Lena, sing with us, soft, seductive, tugging at my will, urging me to step out, to join. Their heads turned as one, every eye finding me, gold and gleaming, their smiles stretching, teeth glinting like bone, their voices calling, Lena! A chorus that pinned me, Cal's growl, Mrs. Tillman's whine, the twins' chime, Tara's drone. A dozen, 100, all mine. I dropped the flashlight, its beams spinning wild, and ran, the woods a chaos of branches and mud, their hum chasing me, a roar that vibrated in the ground, the trees, my bones. Lena, grow with us. Their footsteps crashing behind. Too many, too fast. I tripped, my ankle twisting, pain shooting up my leg, mud soaking my knees, but I crawled, clawed, stumbled up, the trail lost, the house a beacon I aimed for, the clearing's glow fading, the hum a pulse that wouldn't let go. I reached the yard, the gravel crunching, the back door looming, and burst through, slamming it shut, the bolt scraping, my hands shaking as I leaned against it, panting, the hum a roar outside, vibrating in the walls, the floor, my skull. Mrs. Hargrove was awake, her chair in the hall, her tank hissing, her eyes, God, her eyes, glowing gold, bright, unblinking, her mouth parted in a hum that matched theirs, her hands reaching, tendrils curling from her wrists, black and slick, dripping ooze onto the hardwood. It's beautiful, Lena, she rasped, her voice a drone, her smile wide, her teeth sharp, her chair squeaking as she rolled closer, her fingers brushing my arm, cold and wet. I yanked away, her grasp slipping, and ran upstairs, the stairs groaning, her hum chasing me. Lena, sing! A buzz that shook the house, her chair thudding below, her tendrils scratching the steps, slow, relentless. I reached my room, slamming the door, shoving the dresser against it, its legs screeching, my arms aching as I piled books, Gran's Bibles, my paperbacks, on top. A barricade that trembled as the hum grew, the siege beginning. They were outside, Cal's bulk in the yard, his tendrils dragging, Mrs. Tillman's twigs snapping, the twins tapping the porch. Tap, tap, tap. Their gold eyes glinting through the mist, their voices buzzing. Lena, join us. A chorus that pressed against the windows, the walls, the roof, a dozen hands, then more. Scratching, knocking, clawing. The hum, a roar that shook the house. A song I couldn't escape. I grabbed the knife from my bag. Jamie's, its blade dull but steady. Its weight, a lifeline. As I crouched by the bed, the lamp flickering, the hum seeping through the cracks, whispering, grow with us. A pull that tugged at my mind, my will. The windows rattled, glass groaning, Cal's tendrils pressing through, curling like roots, dripping ooze onto the sill, the twins' veins threading gaps, Tara's hands smashing panes, the air thick with that stench. Rot, copper, earth. I slashed at them, the knife slicing black flesh, hisses rising as they recoiled, but more came, the hum a scream, Mrs. Hargrove's voice joining, beautiful, her tendrils at the door, the dresser buckling, the night stretching into an eternity of terror I couldn't outlast. The first light of dawn crept through the shattered windows of Mrs. Hargrove's house, a gray smear that softened the edges of the night's terror, but couldn't erase the hum still echoing in my skull. I crouched in my bedroom, Jamie's pocket knife clutched in my trembling hand, its blade slick with Mrs. Hargrove's black blood, the dresser splintered against the door where her tendrils had clawed through. The silence was a lie, too heavy, too still, broken only by the drip of ooze from the sill where Cal's roots had retreated, the faint creak of the house settling after hours of siege. I'd survived the night, my lullaby a fragile shield against their song, but survival wasn't safety. Not here, not with them, out there, waiting. My ankle throbbed from the woods. My arms ached from shoving the dresser, my throat raw from singing, but I couldn't stay. The hum had faded, their tapping stopped, but I felt their presence, a shadow in the air, a promise of return. I had to run now before the sun climbed higher, and they came back, gold eyes glowing, voices buzzing my name. I moved fast, adrenaline cutting through the exhaustion. The duffel bag lay on the bed, half-packed from days ago, jeans, a hoodie, a water bottle I'd filled last week, the photo of Jamie and me, its edges curled from time. I stuffed in the knife, its handle sticky, and a flashlight from the nightstand, its batteries dead, but a weight I couldn't leave. My boots were by the door, laces tangled, and I yanked them on. The leather cold against my socks, each knot a fumbling prayer for speed. The hallway stretched before me, shadowed and silent, the air thick with that earthy copper stench, rot and roots, a smell that clung to my skin. Mrs. Hargrove's door was ajar, her wheelchair tipped over, black streaks smearing the floor where I'd stabbed her. Her hum silenced, but her eyes burned into my memory, gold, unblinking, pleading. I didn't look, couldn't, just crept past, the stairs creaking under my weight, each step a gamble against collapse. The living room was a battlefield, curtains torn, windows cracked, ooze pooling on the hardwood where their tendrils had breached. The front door hung crooked, its lock useless, scratches carving the wood in jagged lines. I slipped to the back, the kitchen a chaos of overturned chairs and shattered glass, the casserole Tara brought days ago spilling from the trash. its cheese rancid, mingling with their stink. The back door was my exit, its bolt bent but holding, and I eased it open, the hinges groaning, the dawn air a cold slap against my face. The yard was empty, the gravel glinting with dew, the woods a wall of shadow. Beyond, I scanned for them. Cal's bulk, the twin synchronized sway, Tara's tendrils, but saw nothing, heard nothing, just the rustle of leaves and my own ragged breath. I darted out, the duffel bouncing against my hip, my ankle screaming with every step, aiming for the pines, their cover my only chance. The town lay downhill, its trailers dark, its road a ribbon I couldn't risk, not with their eyes watching, their hum waiting. The forest swallowed me, branches clawing my arms, roots snagging my boots, the air damp and sharp with pine. I stumbled through undergrowth thick with ferns, thorns tearing my jeans, my hands scraping bark as I caught myself, the flashlight slipping from the bag, lost in the mud. The hum started again, faint, distant, a whisper on the wind, and I froze, my heart a frantic thud, peering back. Shadows moved in the yard, Cal, his tendrils dragging, Mrs. Tillman's twigs snapping, their gold eyes glinting through the dawn haze. I ran, deeper, the path I'd taken to the clearing, lost in the chaos, my breath a sob, as I zigzagged through trees, their trunks a blur of brown and green. The hum grew, a chorus now, Cal's growl, the twins' chime, Tara's drone, threading through the woods, vibrating in the ground, calling me back. I tripped, sprawling into a ditch, mud soaking my knees, pain shooting through my ankle, and saw them, silhouettes, weaving through the pines, their movements jerky, plant-like, tendrils curling toward me like feelers in the dark. "Lena!" Cal's voice buzzed, closer, his bulk crashing through brush, his eyes twin embers in the gloom. I scrambled up, the knife in my hand, slashing at air as I bolted, the hum a roar in my ears, their footsteps, too many, too fast, closing in. A tendril brushed my arm, cold and slick, and I screamed, slicing it away, black blood spraying, the hum spiking with a hiss. The woods thinned, a dirt track emerging, and I followed it, lungs burning, legs trembling, until it spilled onto the highway. A gray ribbon cutting through the valley, my salvation. I staggered onto the asphalt, waving my arms, the knife glinting in the weak sun, as a truck rumbled into view. A logging rig, its bed piled with felled pines, its horn blaring as it slowed. The driver, a man with a grizzled beard and a flannel shirt, stained with sap, leaned out, his voice rough over the engine's growl. "You lost, girl?" I climbed in, panting, the duffel at my feet, the door slamming shut as I gasped, "Just drive, please." He didn't ask, just shifted gears, the truck lurching forward, hollow bend shrinking in the side mirror, its trailers, its woods, its hum, until it was gone, swallowed by the valley's curve. I slumped in the seat, the cab smelling of pine and cigarettes. The driver, "Roy," he said, lighting a smoke, the ember glowing red as he muttered about late runs and bad roads. I nodded, half listening, my eyes fixed on the mirror, waiting for gold eyes to flare in the dark, the hum to follow. But the miles rolled by, 10, 20, 50, and it stayed quiet. The silence, a fragile truce. Roy dropped me in Cody, Wyoming, a town of dust and wide streets, its neon signs flickering against a sky, bruised with dusk. "Take care," he said, flicking his cigarette out the window, the truck rumbling off as I stood on the curb, the duffel heavy in my hand, the knife a lump in my pocket. Cody was 100 miles from Hollow Bend, a speck of gas stations and diners, its edges fraying into planes that stretched to nowhere. I had $30 left, crumpled in my wallet, and no plan, just a need to keep moving, to put walls between me and the hum. I found a motel on the outskirts, the Sagebrush Inn, its sign buzzing, its paint peeling into flakes of faded blue, and the clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a smoker's cough, took my cash for a week's stay. Room 12, a single with a sagging bed, a TV that hissed static, a window overlooking a parking lot scattered with weeds. "No trouble," she rasped, handing me a key, her fingers stained yellow, her gaze sliding past me. I nodded, locking the door behind me, the bolt of cold comfort as I dropped the bag, the room's musty smell, a balm after the wood's rot. I showered, the water lukewarm, washing mud and ooze from my skin, my ankles swollen but holding, the cuts on my hands stinging under the spray, the mirror fogged, and I wiped it clear, staring at my reflection, brown hair matted, eyes sunken, no gold, no gleam, just me. Still, me. I burned sage from a corner store, its smoke curling through the room, masking that earthy copper stench that clung to my memory, a ritual to keep them out. Days blurred into a routine. Survival, not living. I got a job at the gas station down the road, a squat building of chipped concrete and buzzing lights, pumping fuel for truckers and locals, my hand steady on the nozzle, my eyes scanning their faces. No gold, no hum, just tired nods and crumpled bills. The manager, Pete, a man with a gut and a gravel voice, paid me under the table, $6 an hour, enough for rent and ramen. His only rule, don't steal. I didn't. Kept my head down. My shift's a blur of diesel fumes and small talk I barely heard. Nights were harder. I'd sit on the bed, the TV droning infomercials, Jamie's photo propped on the nightstand. His smile, a lifeline I clung to. The hum came in dreams, soft at first, a whisper under the static, then louder, gold eyes flaring in the dark, tendrils curling through the walls. I'd wake, knife in hand, checking the window, the lot empty, the sage's smoke, a thin shield. I stopped looking in mirrors after a week, afraid I'd see gold, afraid I'd hum, and kept the lights on, the glow a ward against the night. I tried to forget, to rebuild, but Hollow Bend wouldn't let go. I walked to the library one afternoon, a brick box on Main Street, its shelves sagging with mildew and old paper, searching for answers. The librarian, a kid with acne and a bored stare, pointed me to the history section, and I dug through brittle books and yellowed clippings, Wyoming tales, Idaho legends, anything to explain the pit, the roots, the choir. I found a journal, 1892, a miner's scrawl. The earth sang below Hollow Bend, took the crew, gold in their eyes, roots in their bones. Another, 1920s, a preacher's rant. The plague grows, the choir spreads, God's judgment in the soil. No proof, just whispers, but enough to chill me. The pages trembling in my hands as I photocopied them, stuffing them in my bag. Cody's people were normal, or seemed to. Truckers grumbling about routes, kids on bikes, Pete counting cash with a grunt. But I watched them. Pete squint, the clerk's cough, searching for signs. My paranoia a lens I couldn't shed. I'd sit in the diner across from the motel, coffee black and bitter, sketching on napkins, trees, eyes, roots, trying to purge the images, the hum, a faint echo in my ears. The waitress, Sally, a woman with red hair and a smoker's rasp, refilled my cup, her chatter a drone I tuned out, her eyes brown, human, safe. Weeks stretched, 2, 3, a month. My life, a fragile scaffold of work and sleep, the sage burning low, the clippings a pile I read until the words blurred. I'd walk the plains at dusk, the wind sharp with dust, the horizon a promise of distance, telling myself I'd escaped, that hollow bend was a memory, a nightmare, fading. But the hum lingered, a thread in my mind, and I knew, deep down, where fear lived, it wasn't over. The hum returned on a Tuesday night, faint but unmistakable, a buzz that cut through the motel's hum of pipes and TV static. I was on the bed, the sage stick a stub in a cracked mug, the knife beside me, Jamie's photo a talisman against the dark. The clock blinked, 11:43 p.m. The room dim, under the lamp's flicker, when it started, a low drone, rhythmic, threading through the walls, vibrating in my chest. I sat up, my breath catching, the knife cold in my grip, and listened. The same 3 notes, then 5, then a chorus, rising from the plains beyond the lot. I stumbled to the window, the curtain rough against my fingers, and peered out. The parking lot was empty. My Civic, a rusting hulk, a pickup idling near the office. But beyond it, in a field across the road, a glow pulsed, orange, alive, flickering like the fire in Hollow Bend's pit. Shadows moved in it, silhouettes swaying, their outlines jagged, plant-like, gold eyes glinting through the dusk. The hum grew, a song I knew too well, Cal's growl, the twins' chime, a dozen voices I'd fled, calling me, Lena, sing with us, a pull that tugged at my mind. I backed away, the lamp flickering, the sage's smoke curling uselessly, the room shrinking as the hum pressed in. Footsteps crunched outside, slow, deliberate, tap, tap, tap on the gravel, echoing the siege. And I grabbed the duffel, stuffing the clippings, the photo, my hands shaking as the tapping spread. Window, door, walls, a rhythm that matched the hum. Lena, Sally's voice, rasped, flat and buzzing through the glass, her shadow looming, her red hair matted with ooze, her eyes gold now, glowing in the dark. I bolted, the door rattling as I yanked it open, the knife slashing air as Pete's bulk blocked the way, his gut heaving, his hands ridged with veins, his squint a gleam of amber. Stay, he droned, tendrils curling from his fingers, and I ducked, slicing his arm, black blood spraying as he hissed, stumbling back. The lot was alive, shadows weaving from the field. The clerk's cough, a hum, truckers from the diner, staggering closer, their eyes gold, their movements stiff, roots breaking through their skin. I ran, the plains a blur of dust and grass, the hum a roar behind me, their footsteps, too many, too fast, chasing me down. The highway loomed, a lifeline in the dark, and I waved at headlights. A sedan, its horn blaring as it swerved, a woman's voice yelling, "Get in!" I climbed inside, panting, the duffel at my feet, the door slamming as she floored it, Cody's glow fading in the mirror, the hum a whisper on the wind. Her name was Claire, a nurse heading to Cheyenne, her blonde hair tied back, her eyes wide but human, brown, safe. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice shaking, the car rattling with speed. I didn't answer, couldn't, just watch the road, the hum fading, my breath a sob, as we drove, miles, hours, until dawn broke, gray and cold, the plains stretching empty around us. She dropped me in Cheyenne, a city of brick and bustle, its streets a maze I hid in, a boarding house, a room with bars on the window, a job at a warehouse stacking boxes, my hands steady, but my mind frayed. The hum came some nights, faint, a thread from Cody, from Hollow Bend, and I'd burn sage, check my eyes, pray it was memory, not truth. But one evening, stacking crates, I heard it. Pete's grunt, Sally's rasp, a hum from the loading dock, gold glinting in a coworker's stare, the earthy stench rising anew. It was spreading, town to town, voice to voice, root to root, and I knew I couldn't stop it, couldn't outrun it, only flee again and again, until it claimed me, too.